Debbie from So Easy, and in this video we're going to be sewing the Easy Breezy blouse. This is one that I've already sewn. This one's in a satin type of fabric, and I just want to show you some of the features that we're going to sew. Around the top it has this loosely turned over shawl collar, and on the inside the collar and all of the seams have been finished with a French seam, so there are no raw edges on the inside. It looks beautifully finished. Same around the bottom, very nice double turned hemline. And around the armholes we've completed a single fold bias turn towards the inside. On this example I've used fabric which I've cut from my fabric for the blouse itself, but if you want to you can use a contrast or a plain one or a commercially bought bias tape. So this is what the blouse will look like when we're completed. I've cut out another one to use for the tutorial. This one's in a darker fabric. It's a dark brown with like an ivory pattern, but I wanted to show you the type of fabric that I'm using. As you can see, it's extremely light, extremely fine, and it drapes very, very easily. So you want a nice light fabric like this one in order to work with, so that it really creates a nice drape on you and creates a nice collar around the top of the blouse. So we need to start by cutting out the two main pattern pieces, and because our fabric is so fine, it's a good idea to stay stitch. Now I have a separate tutorial which I'll link to on the blog about how to stay stitch and why, but basically we're going to run a line of running stitches around the armhole on the front and back, here, and around on the back neckline here. The front neckline isn't going to be stay stitch. So here's an example of my stay stitching. It's very close to the edge, just about 1/4 of an inch away, and it's just a line of stitching around these curves to make sure that the fabric isn't going to fray too much and it's not going to work its way and stretch out of shape as we work it. So you'll do that around the back neck and all 4 armholes. Then as we look at the front has got a much wider and deeper curve, and this is because we're going to have some gathers around this front. So you will have some pattern markings, some little circles on your pattern piece. So just transfer those markings to the wrong side of your fabric. It'll be around here, and then you'll need a line of gathering stitches around 1/4 of an inch from the edge between the 2 gathering circles. Leave some nice long thread tails so that you can pull them later, and increase your stitch lengths to the maximum, and so a line of gathering stitches around that front neckline, but don't gather them or tie them off for now. So my front gathering stitches are now in place, and now it's time for us to join the shoulder seams. If you're sewing with just a regular seam and finishing them off separately, then you'll want to sew with your right sides together. I'm going to use French seams on mine, which means I'm starting with my wrong sides together. So I'm going to match my shoulder seams at the wrong sides, and once I've done a narrow hem, I'll trim and turn them the other way and then sew them with right sides together. So these are my shoulder seams completed. I've used a French seam, and you can find in the instructions for the blouse, you'll find links to a tutorial if you need to know more about how to do the French seam. On the shoulders where I've done that, I'm now going to press the seams towards the back. If you've done a regular seam, then just press your seams open. Now we need to sew the sides. So if we lay the blouse out flat, and I'm going to sew, pin and then stitch from the armhole to the bottom along the side seams on each side, here and here. Again, I'm going to use French seams on mine, so I'm going to start sewing with my wrong sides together and then switch to right sides together to get a nice finish, and then we can try it on. So sew your side seams and then we'll come back. So the side seams are now sewn. Because of my delicate fabric, I've done the French seam on the side seams here too. So that's pressed and nicely finished. And now it's time for us to bind these armholes. So you need to take your tape measure and just starting up at the shoulder seam, take your tape measure all the way round the outside of this arm, taking care obviously not to stretch the fabric as you do it. And you're going to take a measurement around the armhole, and the same with the other one, and this will be how much bias tape you're going to need. I suggest adding on some extra so that you have plenty to do your overlaps with, and also in case of any errors or because you'll have seams and so on. Oops. And then once you've got your measurements, you'll need to either use some store-bought bias tape or create your own. If you want to make your own bias tape, then there's a set of instructions on the So So Easy website, and I will link to those in the pattern tutorial. So you can make your own bias tape, and then once that's completed we'll come back and we'll stitch it around these armholes. So I finished making my bias tape. I cut a 10-inch square, although yours may be different depending on how large your armholes are, and I cut 2-inch strips of continuous bias and then folded that in half to make 1-inch wide single fold bias tape. And I now need to add that around my armhole. So I'm going to leave just a little couple of inches at the start, and then I'll pin with the raw edge of the tape level with the raw edge around the armhole. And I'm actually only going to pin just a little bit because I want it to move around as I'm sewing. I'm just going to get it started, and then as I do it with the machine I can move a little bit, make sure the tape lines up with the edges and so on. And I think it'll be easier to do it that way than if I pinned the whole lot, and I might end up with some little puckers or something like that. So once I've completed that, I'll come back and we'll look at the next step in the completion of these armholes. So I've now sewn my bias tape on just the first time around my armhole. I used quite a narrow hem, really quite narrow, because I like quite a lot of my bias tape to turn to the inside. So if you want to use a 1/2 inch or a 1/4 inch hem, depending on how much you would like of your bias tape to turn to the inside of your armhole. So now that I have it completed, the first set of stitching around the outside, it's a case now of just pressing the seam open, and then I'm going to turn this bias tape back to the inside of my armhole. I'll make sure these edges are all nicely tucked in, and in order then to get the best result I'll probably hand baste just to keep it in place, and then I'll go round with my sewing machine. If we have a look from the inside, as I turn the bias tape to the inside I'll hand baste in place, and then I'll stitch close to the edge of the tape just here, and that will give me a lovely neat finish to the armhole. So I'll do that, and then we'll come back and take a look at how nicely it finished off. So I've completed the bias tape around the armholes. This is what it looks like from the inside. So you can see how much I've turned in and have just sewn it carefully close to the edge here. And this is what it looks like from the outside. Turn it out the right way. So now you can see there's a nice finish to the outside of the armhole too. You can't really see any of the binding. It's turned right on the edge just here, so the binding's now on the inside, and you have a nice finished edge to your armhole from the outside. So the armholes are now completed, and our top is really taking shape. And the next step is actually to try it on. Try it on in front of a mirror, and what you can do then is take these long gathering threads around the front neckline that you've left from earlier, and just stand in front of the mirror and gather these in until you're happy with the fit. Now the front measurement across here to some extent is going to be a matter of personal taste, and it'll also depend on your bust size. So separate your threads, gather them up, and then move your gathers evenly. And once you're happy with how your gathers are, stand in front of the mirror and check, and then just tie off the gathering threads on each end and put the gathers across evenly or however you like them. And then our next step will be to start work on the neckline. So I'll adjust my gathers and then I'll come back. So our next step, once you're happy with the width of your neck, is to take a measurement. So I'm going to start up at one shoulder seam, and without stretching anything or disrupting those gathers, I'm just going to measure all the way around. Same across the back until I get back to the shoulder where I started. And mine comes in at 32.5 inches back to that same shoulder seam. So yours will probably be different because it obviously depends on what size you've sewn, how much you've gathered, how wide your shoulders are, that kind of thing. So mine was 32.5 inches. So now I need to add on another inch for my seam allowances. So I'm going to cut my rectangular fabric 33.5 inches long, and in the pink version that I sewed, I made it 7 inches wide. Again, it's to some extent a matter of personal choice. If you want lots of gathers and be able to roll the fabric over or have a big drape on it, then maybe you'd want something wider, but I think 7 inches gives a nice finish on this top. So now I'm going to cut myself a rectangle which will be 33.5 inches by 7 inches long, and then we'll come back. So my neck piece is now cut out, and I've joined it with the two short ends together to make a circle. And I'm now just going to sew this here with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then we'll come back and attach it around to the neck of the blouse itself. So my neck piece is sewn and pressed, and I want to turn this in half now to make a long circle of fabric like this. I'm just going to match those raw edges, match up the seam at the back. So that's now ready to insert into our neckline. And I'm going to do French seams on my neckline as well. If you're just doing a regular seam, you will put your neck piece on the right side of your blouse. I'm going to put mine on the wrong side so that I can then turn it later on to do my French seam. And I found the centre back of the back neckline just there, and I'm going to match that with the seam on this neck piece. So I'll put that there and just put a pin in place. And now if I put the blouse down through the centre of the neck piece, come a little bit closer, and I'm now just going to match up all those 3 raw edges. So I've got the 2 edges of the neck piece and the edge of the back neck. I'm going to carry on pinning this all the way round. Of course, eventually I'll come to the part at the front which has the gathers. So as I do it, I'm just going to check that the gathers are all nice and evenly spaced and nothing's all caught up and puckered. I'm going to continue now just pinning this neckline in place. Now my neckline piece is in place, I'm just going to take this to my sewing machine and just sew round in one big circle to join this on. If you're just doing a regular seam, you'll have sewn yours right side together. By the time you've sewn around, you neaten your edges and yours will be finished. Once I've sewn mine once, I've got the French seam, so I'm turning mine to the other side and then finishing off the French seam on the inside. And then we'll come back and have a look and see what that looks like. So my neck piece is now stitched in. I've completed the French seam on mine, so there's no raw edges and everything's looking nice and neat around my neck. The gathers are all still nicely there at the front, and I've just pressed around this seam. Now if we turn the blouse the right side out, and there's nothing worse than fussing with your clothes while you wear them, and because this has a collar which is going to be rolled over, what I like to do is just try it on, make sure everything's fine, and then if I fold this back on itself and just take a couple of little hand stitches here to hold it in place, I do the centre back, then the same at centre front, and if you like you can do the same up on these shoulder seams. And if you want to, if you're happy with your blouse to just have a loose collar, that's fine, but I like to turn mine round and just do those hand stitches just so that it stays in place permanently, and I haven't got a fuss with it. I do want it to be loose and breezy, nice and easy to wear, but at the same time I want it to look neat around this finished collar edge all the time. So that will be the collar completed. The only thing now is for us to take care of this hem, and again we want to complete it so that there are no raw edges. So what I suggest, try the blouse on, make sure you're happy with the length, and when you are, just turn up a small amount, say a centimetre, something like that, less than half an inch. Press that all around and then turn again, probably a wider hem, an inch or inch and a half, something like that, whichever you like, and then stitch on that folded edge, press again, and you'll have no raw edges along the bottom, and then your blouse will be completed. So that's it. This is the Easy Breezy blouse from So So Easy. I hope you'll consider sewing this pattern and enjoy wearing it in the lovely warm weather. Thanks for watching.